Hello, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. So, how do you transform your own organization into making a change? I mean, after all, your brand is changing. Departments become fiefdoms, agencies exacerbate that even more. But how do you connect to a customer who doesn't care at all about your internal politics, your silos, and the changes your brand is going through without even connecting where the customer is today? Martin Lindstrom is a marketing legend, one of Time Magazine's World's 100 Most Influential People. He's been recognized as one of the top 50 thought leaders in the world, the author of several New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling books, including Buyology, Brandwashed, and Small Data. And he is a trusted brand and innovation advisor and expert who works with many of the Fortune 100, including McDonald's, Pepsi, American Express, Microsoft, Disney, and more. And on this episode, we'll discuss how brands can make transformational change, insights, influencers, social media, MarTech, connecting to your customers, siloed KPIs, happy meals, being hunted by sharks, sleeping on a muddy floor in Nigeria, almost being kidnapped in Venezuela, building a Lego land in your backyard, and even a little bit about his appearance on America's Next Top Model. So let's tune in to a branding expert with me, the branded shark, on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Martin, thank you so much for joining me today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would give us, I want everybody to go Google you if there's 3 people in the world who don't know who you are. But if you will, tell us a little bit about your background and yourself.
Well, thanks. My background is a bit unusual because I was a huge fan of Lego when I was a kid.
It's my favorite
And
story on you.
yeah, and it's a crazy story because I was such a big fan that I created my own Lego land in the backyard of my mom and dad's garden when I was 11 years old. And then I was pretty serious. So I opened the doors after 1 year of preparation, and no one showed up except my mom and my dad. It was the lowest point of my career, I think. So I went to a local advertising agency and had them as a sponsor. And 2 days later, I had 131
Mm-hmm.
visitors showing
Mm-hmm.
up. Only problem was that visitor number 130 and visitor number 131 were the lawyers from Lego
Oh, yeah.
suing me.
Right.
And they said to me that that's their brand. And I didn't really know back then what a brand was, but I claimed it was my boxes. And then we had a bit of an argumentation around that. And I ended up by getting a job at Lego. So this was really my first start into communication because Lego had a philosophy and still have a philosophy, which is that they want to understand the audience. And they felt back then that by employing the audience inside the company, they would actually have a different perspective of who the true audience would
Mm-hmm.
be. So that became a philosophy which have stayed with me ever since. So today, what I do is to help Fortune 100 brands across the world to get back on track. We call that brand and culture transformation. So we help the Legos of the world today, but also the Burger Kings or the Maersk or the Googles or whoever it is when they have problems to figure out what the core is and how
Mm-hmm.
they can transform themselves to mirror what consumers want.
Well, it's because of your story as a small child with Legos that I'm asking you this first question. What's your opinion of Ryan's toy reviews and how a lot of parents are using children now as influencers? I mean, you see this kid is, I think he's 7 years old. He's reviewing toys. Now he's got to deal with Walmart. I think Forbes said he was making over $10 million a year. But if that had been you a few years ago during a social media phase, that probably would have changed your life as well because that would have been a great story to tell. But there's also a lot of those impacts on the family and children and what you give up. I mean, my own child knows Ryan and is influenced by him. But what are your thoughts on how children today sort of live in that social world?
I think the issue is that the world has become more transparent, and people think that transparency is good. I actually think transparency is bad, and it
Mm-hmm.
sounds very counterintuitive what I'm telling you right now. But think about this: we can see what everyone else have. We can see how many money they earn. We can see how many fans they have, and by that, what's happening is that we basically also start to compare ourselves. And
Yes.
as I compare myself with everyone else, I very quickly reach to the conclusion that I'm not good enough. We can see that the number of people committing suicide in the UK now has gone up with 25% over the last decade among young people. We're seeing a similar trend here in the United States. And it's basically because we become more and more insecure because we're never good enough. So what we're seeing with the Ryan case, of course, it's wonderful that the kid and the family have a lot of success, but it also puts an enormous pressure on a lot of other people, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of other parents saying, why don't I have a Ryan at home? And their lost ambitions are now going to be channeled through their kid instead. So the kid certainly is in the fire line of trying to be what the parents never managed to be. So I do think we got to a point now where people have to be aware of that social media and that whole transparency has two sides to the story. And just as you would have a branding plan for yourself, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
and for a kid, you also need to have an ethical plan or a plan
Absolutely.
where you also talk about how do I evolve as a child? Because that side, the human side, is more and more disappearing as we become more and more public in everything we do every day, right?
Well, you're on a lot of lists. I would hope that the top being a top 50 thought leader in the world never made you think about how many Twitter followers you had or anything
No,
ridiculous like
no,
that
never.
doesn't mean anything.
No, well, as you know, I don't have a phone, and I decided not to have a phone more than a year ago. And the reason why is very simple. I believe there's three major consequences of using the phone today. First of all, we don't see things anymore. Uh, think about that. As soon as we're bored for a second, the first thing we do is to take up our phone and do something
Mm-hmm.
with it. But we don't see things around us anymore. The third or second thing is that we don't meet people anymore. Think about it. You probably tried it. You're sitting in a bar waiting for someone. The
Mm-hmm.
person is late. What's the first thing you're doing? You grab your phone and do something with the
Mm-hmm.
phone, anything, so you don't look like a
Mm-hmm.
complete loser, right? But the third thing is really the worst. We never get bored anymore, and boredom is the foundation for creativity. The more you have a pause in your life, the more you can reflect or defragment, or look at your life in perspective. I know, Jacques, that you're swimming a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and that's I call that a
Any
water
chance?
moment.
Yeah,
Yeah, the moment where I'm sure you're reflecting about things, but I'm also pretty sure you're much more creative when you're in contact with water.
absolutely.
So these are water moments. I define them as water moments. We don't have them anymore because we're constantly online, and I'm pretty sure that the fact that you're not online when you're swimming also gives you a sense of freedom and disconnection from all that stuff, right?
Yeah, it's the most important thing in the world to me is just to get that freedom. I live online in a digital marketing world, but if I can take
Yeah,
an hour out in the bottom of the ocean somewhere, I'm that's my happy place.
absolutely. So I think in many ways we as human beings need to understand that as seductive, as seductive this shiny thing, this shiny device has become, we are increasingly becoming out of balance. And it's something I'm writing a lot about in my last book, Small Data, where I talk about what you need to find is where we're out of balance, because
Mm-hmm.
the out of
Mm-hmm.
balances which are talking about it's basically reflecting an opportunity for a brand or a new need
Mm-hmm.
out there. And people are out of balance right now because we're too much social media dependent. Yet what's really ironic is that we're never been as antisocial as we are right now. We don't meet people
Couldn't
anymore.
agree more.
We don't touch people anymore. I mean, we're afraid of touching because of sexual harassment, because of bacteria, because of the privacy issue, and because we don't meet people anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole social fabric in our society is falling apart. So there's a lot of downsides with the Ryan story and other similar stories, right?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I know you speak everywhere at conferences all over the world, but it's one of the reasons I like conferences. At least when people are walking around the hallways, you see them up and looking and talking to people. Sadly, once you go into the rooms, they're all staring down at their phones. But there's a brief moment where people are there to network and connect, and it kind of puts them in that context and
Yeah.
mindset to do that. And it's unfortunate because there's just so much in life where it's prevalent where the muscle memory action is to look at the phone instead of look at the person in front of you. So you're at I think roughly 300 plus events a year. When do you get time to sort of settle down and think about where we are in marketing today? I mean, you meet with clients and customers, and you travel to homes, which I thought was brilliant. You're talking to all these different brands and agencies, but when do you sort of get that time to that 65 days left of the year to sit down and think about where we are and where you are as a marketer today?
Well, I'm in a wonderful position because my life is probably very different from most people in the world, for many reasons. First of all, I do travel 300 days a year. But you have to remember, I also spend time in consumer homes. So over the last decade, I spent time in more than 2,600 different consumer homes across 77 different countries.
Mm,
So people ask me, where do I get my inspiration from? I actually get it from that. I get it from spending time in, I wouldn't even call it a house, but a shed somewhere in Nigeria where I'm sleeping on the floor, which by the way is mud, with consumers, or when I'm almost being kidnapped in Venezuela, or I'm spending time in Iran, or whatever country it is, or of course I'm spending time in Tokyo or New York or in London
hmm
or wherever it is.
hmm
These insights give me remarkable insight into people's lives, and that insight tells me about where the future is. Because I won't find about what the future is in an office. You see, the office is a disconnected environment where
Couldn't
people
agree
are
more.
more busy producing PowerPoint slides, checking an enormous, endless stream of emails, and doing politics. And that's really not reality. Reality is what's going on in homes when people are cooking or shopping or partying or whatever they do. So that's where I get the inspiration. And I have to tell you, the list of inspiration I get every day is remarkable high, and it so much stuns me that people don't do the same as I do, because that is my recharging station.
Hmm
Yet I ask myself, where do other people recharge themselves when the most of their life is dedicated to sit in meeting rooms, to check emails, do PowerPoint presentations, and create politics?
Agreed. So, and I put this out on, as sort of an informal poll of my own. I'm kind of curious, really, what your opinion is. Where do people today, if they're not connecting with a customer, which is the best way to learn as a marketer or advertiser, but where do people today get the best marketing or advertising experience for their working careers? I mean, to your point, a lot of the marketing departments, they're siloed at best, let alone they're in some cubicle world and still don't talk to each other. But for the most part, a lot of people, and you owned an agency at one point, they've either worked for an agency, maybe they grew out of that and went to an advertiser, or vice versa. But where do you see people getting the best education to get rooted back to the customer? Is it an agency, a publisher, an entrepreneur, a brand advertiser itself? What are your thoughts
Well,
on where people can learn and get better to get connected to the customer?
well, first of all, I'm going to say something truly provocative here. I don't think the concept of an advertising agency will survive today. The issue with advertising agencies, and mind you, I came myself from advertising. I was almost born and raised in BBD, back in the days, and left that in year 2000. So that's my background, and I respect it a lot. But the reality is that advertising agencies are somewhat disconnected from their reality.
Completely.
Uh, think about this. In most companies, you will see they will spend between 10 and 15% on R&D. Yet today, if you ask an advertising agency, they will spend zero. They will spend all their money on pitches. And when they get a client, they're more busy at creating makeup, i.e., creating a great advertising campaign, rather than saying the product is actually not right. We have to fix the
Right.
product. And I think a lot of my work is to go in and fix the product. Let me give you an example. So one of our clients is Swiss International Airlines, which is a large airline company based out of Europe, and they came to us and asked us if we could change economy class. Now, if you were to ask people about economy class, what they would change, people would probably say more leg
More
room,
leg
better
room.
catering food, yeah, better entertainment. You know the drill, right? And I'm sure if we talk about the advertising agencies, they will then take that insight and build a campaign around it, claiming that the food is the best in the world, or we
Hmm
have 5 inches more
And then you
of
get a
leg room.
bill for 20 hours of their work.
Exactly, yeah. But where this went wrong is that I asked you the wrong question. The reality is, I should not have asked you, what would you improve in economy class? I should have asked, how do you feel when you're flying economy class? And your answer probably would have been very different. Probably you would have said, I feel anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Think about this. You're rushing to the airport, you're late. The check-in line is incredibly long. You're almost late. You're going through TSA. It's a nightmare. You have your little stroller. It's not very big in your mind, but certainly the cabin crew think is very big. So you are standing zone 7
Mm-hmm.
and you rush aboard on the plane, and guess what? You can't get a seat and you can't get this and that. It's anxiety. So what we did with Swiss International Airlines was really to look at that insight from a different point of view. And this is what's happening on board on the plane today in many cases. People are basically saying when you're on board on the Swiss plane, welcome on board on Swiss International Airlines. We hope you had a great flight. We're about to descend into JF Kennedy's airport in about 40 minutes. Now, I have some wonderful news. I've just been in contact with ground handling, which tells me we'll arrive at gate number 109, which, by the way, is only 6 minutes walk from immigration. And by the way, the waiting time at immigration is only 19 minutes, and the luggage carousel waiting time is only 18 minutes. So
Mm-hmm.
you'll be through the other side in around an hour from now on. But even better, I've been on Waze, and Waze informs me there's only 49 minutes drive into Manhattan. If
Right.
this is your hope, you'll be back home in 2 hours. Now, if I told you that, what will happen is that the anxiety you have when you're disembarking, rushing through immigration, will kind of disappear. But
Mm-hmm.
you'll also at the same time think about the product. You will say, gee, Swiss is always on time, aren't they? And this is insight coming first of all from consumer insight. That is where you ask the right question. You spend time in consumer homes. And what we did with Swiss, and this is back to your question about what would I do if I was a marketeer to learn about the reality. Well, what we did there was to take the cabin crew with us, to take the captain pilots, ground handling with us into passenger homes, by the way, here in New York City. So we flew them in from Europe. They were sitting in ordinary consumer homes. And of course, the passenger had no idea about what was going on. So we would sit there next to them and book the next flight
Mm-hmm.
on an airline company. Now, in many cases, it was not Swiss. So we
Right.
would learn about that. They will get insight about that, which were fascinating. But most importantly, I would also work as a cabin crew on board on Swiss International Airlines to learn how does the world look like from a passenger's point of view or from a cabin crew's point of view. And this is my advice to everyone listening or watching this, that you should never be too good to spend time in real people's lives, homes,
Couldn't agree
in
more.
offices, whatever. I mean, I met up with the founder and the owner back in the day, the late Ingvar Kamprad, which is the founder and owner of IKEA. And
Mm-hmm.
when I met up with him, it was around 18, 19 years ago now. He was not in the office. And I said, where is he? And they said to me, he's at his usual place. Where's that? I said, well, it's down at the cash register.
That's
Sure
great.
enough, I
Yeah.
went down there. He was sitting there checking every customer out. And I asked him during the break, why? And he said, because I can look everyone in the eyes. I can see the dreams. I can see the
Mm-hmm.
hope, see what's missing. And this is the foundation for why IKEA is so great today. And I'll never forget that story from him back then. And that's really, together with my story with Lego, the reason why I spend so much time with customers and consumers.
Yeah, I've always I loved the idea of the TV show Undercover Boss because it put, CEOs back in touch with their employees, but I have always wanted them to do an undercover customer, basically like that, somebody working at the register who starts
Absolutely.
speaking, be the greeter at Walmart, so,
Yeah,
not the CEO of Walmart would ever need to necessarily do that, but there's so much just at that experience level that I wish they would go
absolutely. Yeah,
through.
yeah.
Well, one of Mark Schaefer, mutual friend of ours, has spoken about you. He interviewed you as well for his book, and I heard him speak specifically about you, and he said that if he could learn from any, and this is high praise coming from a very well respected marketer in the world, he said that if he could learn from or work for any one person in the world, it would be you. And he and I have just huge respect for your learnings, your teachings. But one of the things that he really has gotten into with his book Marketing Rebellion is also this uprising of the customer, and it's part of the mission that you've described that you're on. If you would kind of elaborate a little bit about what your mission is today as a marketing consultant, providing that advice to these different brands.
Well, I've learned over the years that one thing is for you to obtain or get a hold of great insight and come up with great ideas. Another thing
Mhm.
is to make it become real in an organization. And there's a huge gap between those two sides. And I learned this many years ago when I worked for McDonald's, where we came up with a reinvention of the Happy Meal to make it more healthy, and it completely failed in the political system of McDonald's because they're just not geared for it.
Mhm.
And out of that, I learned how do you navigate a system. So over the last 20 years, we've had psychologists attending our meetings with our clients to understand where is it goes wrong and what can you do. And here's some of the insight I've learned. First of all, an organization have an immune system. An immune system is really a defense mechanism for change.
Mhm.
Now, if I ask you or ask anyone if you like to change, most people will say yes. But when you really push you, most people wouldn't.
Mhm.
My best analogy is an experiment done with chickens, which many years ago were put into a cage and stuck into the cage for half a year. And then one day they were let out to the beautiful green grass, and the sun was shining, and the birds were singing, and the chickens went out, and guess what? Within seconds, they went straight back in again to the
Mhm.
cage. And I call that the chicken cage syndrome. And most corporations today are suffering from the chicken cage
Great.
syndrome. It's they're afraid of changing. So the first thing I want to say is that you need to understand the immune system in the organization, because you can come with the most brilliant ideas on planet Earth, but there is a huge risk, a 99% risk, that they will never materialize. So, what I've done and what I've learned works, and I'll strongly recommend anyone listening and watching this to do the same, is to bring the people from the organization into homes of consumers or customers. So when we do our consumer insights, we call that subtext. It's something, a term I'm using in small data in my book. Well, when we bring these people with us, we do it not just to learn, but also for them to create a sense of empathy.
Mhm.
Empathy is where you can feel the pain or the joy a real person have. You do not feel that from a screen. You do not feel that from a
Agreed.
report or a PowerPoint presentation. So when we bring them out with us, just as we did with Swiss or with Lego or any of those companies, they suddenly feel what these respondents are feeling. And then what we do is we bring them back into the organization, and then we gather at the whole group, and they all now have experienced the world from one point of view, which is a consumer's point of view. That removes politics in an organization.
Mhm.
You see, politics happens when you're too busy concentrating around your division and your own KPIs, but quite often those KPIs are disconnected from the reality. I mean, when I talk to most companies, less than 15% of the KPIs are allocated to consumer satisfaction. Most of it
Yes.
is to internal issues, right? And then what we do is we take that and we break it down to what I call short term activities, proof points. So basically say, here's the problem the consumer have. What immediate initiatives can we implement which are going to give an impact not just on the outside world but also internally, so it gives the organization a sense of hope. And that we will celebrate a lot, that whatever initiative it is, we'll celebrate a lot internally, so people get hope. They feel, wow, it's not scary to jump out of that chicken cage. And as that happens, more and more chicken will go out of the chicken cage, and that's where you have a transformation of an organization. And this took me 20 years to learn. Guess what? 20 years it took me to learn this. But today, I've learned that once you do that, that's where you can infuse transformation and innovation into an organization, right?
Well, do you think the apprehension with the immune system is simply based off sales and revenue?
I think the immune system, I'll tell you the reason why the immune system is happening. Immune system is happening for one single reason. In the old days, you had a set of KPIs, and the KPIs typically were linked with two things. One is happy customer, earning money. Very simple.
Hmm.
Then we broke down the KPIs to smaller pieces of KPI. Why? Because we needed to inform Wall Street about the progress. They want to have quarterly earning reports. They want to have more information so they can do a prediction of where this company is going. So what they did was they broke down the KPIs to sub KPIs. Each of them, each division would now be responsible for a set of KPIs. It worked wonderfully for a while because each of those KPIs were, because of its past, still linked together to the consumer focused. But then each of those KPIs became mini ecosystem. It's almost like small arrows going in each of the different directions. And that silver lining, which were keeping it together, i.e. the customer satisfaction, faded out. One division will be more focused on operational issues, one will be more on time, one will be more on efficiency, whatever it would be. And suddenly all these KPIs will go in each of the different directions. Now, this is where the problem happens. If you have, let's say, 10 different divisions, and each of the KPIs for each of those divisions are pointing in different directions, how much incentive do you have to work together?
Mm-hmm.
Really nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And where's the customer in all this? Really nowhere, because you're more busy pleasing yourself and your own internal issues than the external ones. And that's the reason why politics is there, but it's also the reason why we have this fear for change, because I will lose what I already have acquired in my own little division. That power I gained, I will lose that.
Agree.
Rather than me saying, well, guess what, Mrs. Smith out there, she don't even like our product. I mean, think about Kellogg's, a wonderful American icon, was completely missing the boat right now.
Mm-hmm.
And because no one eats Kellogg's cornflakes,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not healthy. And they have known that for 15, 20 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
But they still don't want to listen to
Right.
it, right?
Right.
They still produce classic CBDs, which are standing on the shelf with lots of chemicals in it. And consumers don't want it. Why don't they want to listen to it? It's because they're stupid? Not necessarily. It's because their KPIs are measured completely different. So they are in a stretch jacket internally and can't really change, right?
Well, what worries me a lot, and it's part of the reason why I asked you which role you'd work in, whether it was agency, publisher, advertiser, entrepreneur, consultant, is that, and I agree with everything you said, is I had heard the story before about your success with the broccoli and the Happy Meal in the European Happy Meal. And it was successful there. It was brought here. And then you realized that I think you met with them in Chicago and it stalled and they didn't move forward with it. It still seems that so many companies today, the there are people like us who get frustrated by the siloing, if you will, where departments get completely dispersed from each other. But those politics that keep building between the marketing department and the IT department, the board of directors, whether it's operational or the ownership board or the investors, never pushes this, and it all but has to come down on a one person to implement that change, whether it's Tim Cook or Steve Jobs or whoever that can do that for Apple, or Bezos who wants to create what we generally think of as a great customer experience within Amazon. Unless somebody is really doing that, I haven't seen yet to where there's enough pressure to push these departments together to work together. And I don't know if there's enough of an upswell internally, uh, and that frustrates me. And that's one of the things I continue to try to hope to change. But I've been a lot focused on my own career in lead generation, and I'm to some of where what I read with Marketing Rebellion, with Mark's book as well. Some of what I see is when that starts to affect sales, you tend to believe that's when it'll implement a change. But to your point with Kellogg's, it still hasn't, and I don't understand why. Probably the same reason why a smoker who develops lung cancer still smokes. It's unfortunate to me, and it's never made enough sense to figure out what those pain points are that will wake somebody up and say we need to make a change internally and start fixing it. So
Well, I get your frustration, and I think because my company is so focused on transformation, we've spent a tremendous amount of time understanding the psychology of what is it which are holding people
mm-hmm,
back. Um, the key issue is fear. It
mm-hmm,
really is fear. Fear of losing my job, fear of displaying myself, fear of being discovered that I'm not good enough. That type of driver is driving things
right,
at the moment.
sure,
Um, I think the most important thing for me to say is there's not a lot of Steve Jobs hanging on the trees these days. Um, and if they are, I'm pretty sure everyone want to work for them, or perhaps they don't. But the reality is that in most organizations, you won't find a Steve Jobs, because here's the issue. the Steve Jobs by nature is dying as soon as they're being put into a listed company, because the listed company have a lot of anonymous shareholders, and they
Exactly.
have, and even worse, they have pension funds, and pension funds are the worst enemies for brands. And why is that? Because pension funds have no opinion. Pension funds is just vesting in what they
Hmm.
think is going to give them the best return. And that means when you, as a CEO, perhaps you're very visionary, are going out saying, this is a direction I believe our company will go. We have a 5-year horizon. Pension fund couldn't care about that
Hmm.
because they want to see a return right now. So everything has become incredibly short term. So here's what I've learned. I've learned that two things. If you are sitting in an organization right now and you want to make a change, first of all, create a change with a link straight to the consumer inside. No one will fire you for that. Uh, and spend more time with the consumer and find the observation on the inside. Then create a short term activity, but try to invite people from other functions into your game. If you cannot do that for some reason, then try to create a small success linked straight to the consumer. And once you have that, celebrate it internally and give everyone who's been involved the credit for it. Then invite colleagues from other divisions into that group and say, hey, I want to do the same with you guys. And then celebrate that success again and let that grow within the organization. And quite often you had to do this under the radar. I'll give an
Right.
example.
Right.
McDonald's and McCafe was invented in Australia. The reason why McCafe became fairly successful, given the fact that they were not in the coffee market when Starbucks were
Hmm.
beginning their business, was because it happened under the radar in Australia. McDonald's in the US could not care less about what happened in Australia, so therefore they could do whatever they wanted to do. So they created McCafe, and that became a huge success because they had a success story that could export to the US and to other countries. The reason why Coca-Cola's naming concept, where you put names on the cans, became a success is because was not invented in the US. It was actually invented originally in Australia, and it was invented there because they were out of the radar. No one saw it.
Hmm.
It was not all these operational challenges. We can't do it, and we're destroying our trademark and whatever. The reason why. The whole sweetener concept, the latest one coming out from Coca-Cola, where they use this new concept of cane sugar, was successful in the US, is because it came out of Argentina, because it was out of the radar. And
Hmm.
so what I'm saying here is work under the radar, create a small success story, and once you have this package, then boom, set it through the organization and celebrate it with everyone. But if you start to engage too many people up front, it becomes a political game where you're watering it
Hmm.
down very quickly. So you really have to give yourself the freedom
Hmm.
of the freedom required to be innovative and to break the rules, right?
Well, so you're saying if you want to test anything, go south of the equator.
Yeah.
There you go. So, one of the things that I've also heard both you and I'm a reference Mark again talk about is technology and getting too focused on the tech. I've worked as well in Martech as part of my career. How do you see tech either helping or hurting us today? There's obviously a lot of focus on it. It's obviously a huge revenue growth. It's easy to automate a lot of data, but in your opinion, is the tech helping the customers solve problems and brands better connect with them?
Well, it has a pro and a con, and
Yeah.
as everything does these days. And I think technology has increasingly become a phenomenon where you install technology for the sake of technology. You want to have a big data strategy for the sake of having a big data strategy because everyone else have a big data strategy, so we need to have one as
Agreed.
well.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting to the point now where we don't question if this is really adding value to the consumer. We're rather saying how much money can we save internally. What cost savings can we make because of this? Now, Zappos would not have existed if that would have been the mindset. Certainly, I know with Jeff Bezos and Amazon that their key focus was and still is Is it adding value for the customer? Remember, Amazon lost money for the first 15 years,
Hmm.
and they basically were just reinvesting it into extraordinary consumer and customer service. And time after time, when I talk to people today, they point at Amazon as being the outstanding company in the world in customer service, even though very few people have spoken to anyone in there. So here's my view on it. You need to ask yourself, what added value is technology going to give the consumer? And if you are going to say, well, they'll get things faster, then my question is, what human emotional value is it going to give? And that's where you need to understand that in many cases, it probably is not going to give a lot of value. And that's where you have to cut your path in a different direction. Um, I think most of us are sick and tired of being on call centers where some person from another country is answering it, where you go through 15 layers of
Hmm.
pressing this and that to get through it, and we just give up in the end of the day. Um, if that is the case, how come someone is not saying we are the only one, we're the only bank in the world, we only have local people employed, which by the way is working with your mindset. Gerber did that for a while. When Gerber was before it was acquired by
Hmm.
Nestle, Gerber in fact only had a mother sitting in the call center answering questions to other mothers.
Hmm.
I mean, that was the foundation for why Gerber became as big as it is in the US. Why are banks not doing that today? Well, they will say it's because of cost, but then you spend billions of dollars on
Exactly.
advertising to
Yeah.
tell people there's a difference, but there is no difference, right?
Hmm.
Because we're just like any other bank. So my view is, ask yourself, can technology help to create an emotional point of differentiation? And if it can, fantastic. And then sometimes it can, absolutely. But in many cases, it definitely can't. And that's where you have to pause for a second, right?
Yeah, I've seen it firsthand as well. I mean, when people think they can just throw, to your latter point, money at ad spend or at tech to make the problem better, they don't. I don't think they understand what the problem itself is. So,
No,
I am a big fan of really all of your books. I showed you
thank you.
Buyology earlier. I mean, Brand Sense, Brandwashed, Buyology, Small Data. I think you've got 7 best New York Times bestsellers. As an author, do you believe that each of your books is now starting to continue a story that's evolving over time as a marketer, or is it something that you think of? You've got Small Data today. The next book you'll write will be out at some point. You're not going to put down the pen, but is it going to continue to evolve that story and how you as a marketer see it, or how you see the market itself?
Well, I think both. I think, first of all, and this may be a piece of advice for everyone which wants to build their personal brand.
Mm-hmm.
I've always had the philosophy that if you want to stand for something, you need to combine two ordinary things in a new way. So many years ago, when I began this game, I wanted to be the best in branding in the world, but I don't need to tell you, I had zero experience and I didn't have a client.
Yeah.
So I took the concept of branding and then I said, let me combine that with something unusual. So I combined it in 1994 with the internet. And that was
Mm-hmm.
the year the browser was invented. And I took branding and internet, and it became my first book, was this brand building on the internet. And then I said, let's combine it with clicks and mortar. Clicks and
Mm-hmm.
mortar became a term in one of my books. And then I said, what about kids and branding? And that became
Mm-hmm.
brand child. And then I took the senses and branding, and that became brand sense. And then I took neuro and science, it became neuromarketing, and that became biology. So I always combine two ordinary things in a new way. What they've had in common is they've always looked at the world from a consumer point of view.
Exactly.
Um,
It always goes back to that kid who was
Absolutely.
doing Legoland.
Always, and it will continue to do so. It is, of course, a reflection very much about where I am in my state of life. And um, what I increasingly are doing with my books, and some people may find it frustrating, is I'm not as much as I did in the past hammering the message about branding through. First of
Right.
all, branding is going out of fashion right now. Big brands, global brands are dying. And I think we will see that truly global brands will perhaps not exist in about 2 decades from now on. So, what is coming in instead? What's coming instead is an inherent, really deep psychology understanding of a psychological understanding of the consumer. And once you understand that, you can create the perception around it. Now, that may be called a brand, it may be called something else, I don't know. So the journey I take my readers on board is to say, how can I make this happen in my organization? because the biggest hurdle right now is not to understand brands, it is to execute those great ideas internally in the organization. That's where the biggest issue is. So yes, this is a reflection of me evolving and a reflection of the society evolving as well, right?
So, of all the things that have gotten you notoriety over your career with your books, your hundreds and thousands of speaking engagements now with the TV show appearances, what has helped propel you the most to get your message out? And if you tell me it's America's Next Top Model, then I'm going to be worried.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think definitely the books have helped me a lot, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
tell you why. When you write a book, it helps you to defragment your information in your brain and systematically put them into small compartments in your brain, which makes it easier for you to articulate that stuff later on. It may be
Mm-hmm.
you have the most amazing ideas in your mind, but before you write them down on a piece of paper and go through this scrutiny of a process to structure it so everyone want to read about it, it's a long way, and it's really valuable. Books have helped me not just to do that, it's also helped me, of course, to add credibility. So that's one pocket. The second thing is I've always wanted to be provocative. So as you may recall, in the book Buyology, which were based on the largest neuroscience study in the
Mm-hmm.
world, I raised $7 million. And I'll tell you, when we did that whole fundraising, it was a nightmare, and I was almost giving up because no one wanted to be associated with neuroscience
Mm-hmm.
in this space. Now, one of the conclusions we came out of this book was that the health warnings on the cigarette packs, the surgeon's health warning, general
Mm-hmm.
surgeon's health
Mm-hmm.
warning, is counterproductive. In fact, it encouraged people to smoke more, not less. And that was a very dramatic insight, which later on was the reason why cigarette packs and the design of those across the world is changing, because I basically worked with government officials to create new mechanisms to make people quit smoking much faster. That was a very dramatic conclusion coming out of a very dramatic study. And that's my second advice: create studies, uh, question interesting observations in our lives, create a provocative and typically counterintuitive hypothesis, because that makes people think and reflect. So that would be number two. And number three, for me, is that uh, don't talk to the world as you are an expert. Talk to people in layman terms and tell stories which are natural and straightforward.
Amen.
And when I write my books, they may come across as being so easy to read. But
Mm-hmm.
as Winston Churchill once said, I wanted to write a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. And so I spend a lot of time on crafting a narrative which is straightforward. My presentations are really simple. Um, but I do believe our attention span today do not allow complex messages to sort of stick in our brain. And I do believe that it's very simple. People will talk about it and convey that message to other people in an equally simple way. So these are probably three of my advice right now. Hopefully that can help somehow.
No, it's very helpful. So, Martin, it's that special time in the show, known worldwide except in Australia. Are you ready for the five most important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Oh yeah, bring it
All
on. I'm
right.
curious to hear what it is.
Marketing or advertising?
Marketing.
A happy meal, today's happy meal, or broccoli?
Broccoli by far.
Psychology or neuroscience?
Psychology.
Lincoln Logs, America loves Lincoln Logs, or Legos?
A Lego, of course.
Of course. And the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread.
With no hesitation whatsoever. So, what is sidebar question as well? What is your favorite kind of shark and why for somebody that spends time in the water?
Well, it has to be the white shark, of course,
Yeah.
because it's so iconic. You know, you had to remember I spent a lot of my time in Australia,
Yeah.
and I actually met up with a girl the other day, believe it or not, which entertained me about sharks for about 3 hours at a dinner table. It was fascinating because she had both been swimming with sharks but
Hmm.
also been hunted by sharks.
She had
Sharks
also
is
been what?
hunted by sharks. You
Hunted. Yeah.
literally,
Yeah.
Yeah, she literally tried that at the beach in Australia. And what I find fascinating about sharks is that you know the statistics very well. I
Hmm.
think the risk of you being attacked by a shark is less than the risk of you having a coconut from a palm tree falling into
Exactly.
your
That's
head.
exactly correct. Yeah.
And I find sharks so fascinating because it's become a brand. Perhaps because of Steven Spielberg, I don't know,
Yeah.
but certainly it's become a brand which are encapsulating fears in our mind, and therefore it's both intriguing but also scary at the same time. And in many ways, I think that's our life today, isn't it?
It is. I actually tweeted recently that I was frustrated that the Meg was not represented by the Oscars, and it's time that it's something other than Jaws gets some life. So, Martin, where can people find out more about you? Where do you point them to? Social channels. They obviously can't call you, but we want them to buy the books and
Yeah,
watch
yeah,
you on TV.
exactly. Well, listen, visit me on martinlindstrom.com, martinlindstrom.com, and there's a newsletter there, by the way. But also, you can visit me at LinkedIn. Of course, I'm on Twitter and on Instagram, and of course on Facebook. And either it's Martin Lindstrom or else it's Lindstrom Company, one of the two.
Martin, again, it's been my honor, and thank you again for being on A Shark's Perspective today.
You're most welcome, and good luck.
So there was my conversation with Martin Lindstrom, a marketing legend, one of Time Magazine's World's 100 Most Influential People, recognized as one of the top 50 thought leaders in the world, the author of several New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling books including Buyology, Brandwashed, and Small Data, and he's a trusted brand and innovation advisor and expert who works with many of the Fortune 100. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, Martin is so very right when he says that we are out of balance. We are too much social media dependent, but we're more antisocial than ever today. How does he get connected and inspired? Well, he speaks at approximately 300 events a year. He gains a lot of insights from meeting directly with people, but especially when he's in their homes. And he's recognized as one of the top marketers in the entire world, and he doesn't have a cell phone. And he doesn't work in an office. As he so wisely said, you can't figure out the future with being in an office that is typically disconnected and where people are checking emails, making presentations, politicking, if you will, and other mundane tasks. His inspiration comes from the reality of where people live, shop, etc. I could not agree with him more. Everything that we do should be to connect better with our customers. We as marketers and business leaders should, and I quote, never be too good to spend time in real people's lives, homes, offices, or whatever. Second, there is a huge gap between where you come up with good ideas and how you implement those in a work environment. As he goes on to describe, organizations have an immune system, a defense system for change, and most companies are afraid to change. Your idea can be brilliant, but fall on deaf ears if the decision makers don't have a sense of empathy or aren't closer to the customer than the PowerPoint describing them on their screens. If you're sitting in an organization right now and you want to make a change, first of all, create a change with a link straight to the consumer inside. As he described, no one will fire you for that. Third, a big pet peeve of mine is we've siloed efforts and KPIs between departments today. And that's another reason companies don't work well enough together with that focus on the customer that's so badly needed. Internally, you've got politics and fiefdoms and separate agencies and other agendas. Marketers and business leaders need to spend more time with their customers. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. It has been my privilege to spend this time with you in order to discuss another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. So now it's time for me, as Martin said, to go back to my happy place, be creative, and swim again with some sharks. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.